I'm Judy Maggio with Austin PBS, and I am honored to kick off our first breakfast of 2020 for Leadership Austin Engaged Breakfast Series. Our topic today is something that's really near and dear to the hearts of so many of us who love this city. The topic is, can we build a beloved community and keep Austin weird? And I think there's no better person to kick off this discussion than our Leadership Austin Board President and President of Houston-Tillotson University, Dr. Colette Pierce-Burnett. Colette, take it away.
Am I unmuted? He muted me in case I said something inappropriate earlier. Well, good morning and Happy New Year, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here this morning on behalf of the Board of Directors of Leadership Austin. And if I could get my fellow board members just to stand or raise your hand where they are so you can see who they are. So if you have any questions, if you can stand, don't be shy. I have 3 or 4 board members in here. If you have any questions about Leadership Austin, please feel free to stop one of us at the end. So Happy New Year, happy 2020. We're in a brand new decade. It's hard to believe that we're almost a week into the new decade. I want to thank you for being here this morning on behalf of the board and the staff. This conversation about can we keep Austin weird and still build a beloved community? The beloved community is something that, why is my sister texting me? Keeping it weird. That's what she's not saying. Okay, so it's 2020, I'm here. So as we gather this morning for this important conversation, there are 3 things that we want you to take away. We want you to be informed, to share information about a community topic, hear a perspective sometimes different than our own so that we can open ourselves up to that, and act. So every time we have an engaged breakfast, we want it to be engaging. We want you to leave with some kind of action that you can do in your own sphere of influence. It may be as simple as sharing what resonated with you in the conversation with family or friends, or to get more involved in an issue about our beloved community here in Austin, Texas. So how many people are Leadership Austin alumni in the room? Oh, that's beautiful. That's wonderful. So we've heard that after the engaged breakfasts, we want to have a conversation to continue to reflect on what we've heard. So today, at the end of this conversation, we've started what's called the Alumni Corner, which is an opportunity for all alumni and current class members to participate in a short, maybe 40-minute reflective dialogue immediately following the panel at 9:05 a.m. right here in this room. And it's also your opportunity to provide feedback to us, because that's how we grow and get better with each iteration of this, is from your feedback. And Karen Gross is going to lead that discussion. Is Karen in the room? Karen, can you please stand so that we can see you? So everybody look for Karen at the end, 9:05, if you want to continue this discussion. So we always have to take a minute, pause for the cause, and thank our sponsors. So we have St. David's Healthcare, Texas Gas Service, Wells Fargo, and Austin Community Foundation for their ongoing support this season. Let's give our sponsors a round of applause. And our presenting sponsor is Ascension Seaton, and their Chief Advocacy Officer, Geronimo Rodriguez, a friend of mine, is here. So Geronimo, thank you, and thank Ascension for sponsoring us, for your support. So that's the script that Courtney gave me, and I got in town last night and I read it this morning. So thank you, Courtney, for staffing me. So off script, these kinds of conversations and these kinds of discussions is what makes Austin such a powerful community. Whether we want to keep ourselves weird or keep ourselves magical, that's what keeps us as a powerful community and a beloved community for all. And we have some really powerful discussion leaders this morning, led by the most capable Judy Maggio, and I'm really excited to hear from them. And I want to thank each of the panel members for being here and for sharing your perspectives this morning. So thank you.
Thank you, Colette. Just a few reminders before we begin. If you post on social media, and we sure hope you do, use the hashtag LeadEngage and tag Leadership Austin at Leadership ATX. As Colette mentioned, the Alumni Corner is going to take place right there starting at 9:05, and we'd love for some of you to stick around if possible to share your feedback and ideas on today's panel. Also, our PBS News and Public Affairs program is called Decibel, and our very talented Decibel team is there at the back of the room. We are live streaming today's conversation on our Facebook page. So we hope that you will not only like our Facebook page, but share this conversation with your friends. These discussions also have a spot on our YouTube page, Decibel ATX, and of course they live on the Leadership Austin website. So perhaps you want to share this discussion. It's a great way to scale these conversations and get the word out to people who possibly couldn't drive downtown and be at the library with us this morning on this beautiful day. As with tradition at Leadership Austin Engaged Breakfast, we invite everyone to participate. That means we want to hear from you. We want you all to ask questions this morning, both those of you watching online and those of you here in person at the library. So the important person in this conversation is Courtney Bailey. If Courtney, could you stand and wave? She's right here. Here are instructions on how to text in a question. Courtney is really your voice today. She leads the Engaged Breakfast series for Leadership Austin. She'll be fielding those questions, looking for themes, and asking our panel members. So we want to jump right in. If you see a top 10 list in some of the media that you're reading, chances are Austin will be on that list, kind of no matter what the list is. And if you try to find the secret sauce and ask people, what do you think makes Austin so weird and special, you'll probably get a million different answers. While we sometimes think this is just a flash in the pan, city demographer Ryan Robinson says Austin has been in the top 5 growth sectors for the last 3 decades. Just this week, Inc. magazine named Austin as the #1 best city for starting a business in 2020. So this growth and expansion and excitement is not going away anytime soon and has been a long time in the making. So today we want to explore 2 concepts, really. The first one, what is the history and status of keeping Austin weird? What does it really mean? And 2, in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday this month, we want to thread in this concept of the beloved community where we create a city that is loving and accepting, inclusive, equitable, and empowers people of all backgrounds. So joining us today are 3 people with, I think, very unique perspectives on this topic. Dr. Peniel Joseph, who is the professor of public affairs at the University of Texas LBJ School of Public Affairs.
Give Barbara Jordan a shout out. Barbara Jordan chair.
He's the Barbara Jordan chair.
Yeah, give her a shout. Yeah.
And we all know that Barbara Jordan was an instrumental person in making Austin the wonderful, welcoming place that it is. Next, we have Lazina Lola Stevens-Bell. She's the former owner of the Nubian Queen Lola's Cajun Seafood in East Austin and current owner of Multiple Choice by Nubian Queen Lola. Thank you for being here this morning. Finally, my friend Eddie Wilson is here to give us some great history. Eddie is the former owner of the infamous Armadillo World Headquarters, the current owner of the historic Threadgills restaurant, which also is a music focus. So thank you for being here this morning, Eddie. And Eddie, since I have you down there, I think you're going to probably have the answer that is the longest. How many years have you been in Austin? I've been here 41 years. I think you've been here longer than that.
I didn't even try to do the math on it, but I have to go back to my biography to find out. I got here in either 48 or 49.
All right.
And so I was 5 and too young to start school because September the 1st was the deadline on turning 5 or 6. And my mother was not going to have me sitting around the house.
That would be dangerous.
We got here from Mississippi, which is the best thing that a stepfather ever did for a stepchild. My father was killed in World War II, and Mama married Woody Wilson, the pipe fitter plumber, when I was about 3 and a half. And he got us out of Mississippi and out of Texas City and then to Austin, and it's absolutely the best thing anybody could have ever done for me.
Yeah, and you've sure made a mark on this city. We're going to hear more about that in
That's
just
that's what a dog does. Come on.
Lola, on that happy note, how long have you lived here?
Myself?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry, since 1980.
1980.
Yes,
So what
ma'am.
brought you to Austin?
Well, I actually was on my way to Hollywood. I wanted to become a superstar. And so I had to come and bring my little niece and nephew to my sister, and I wound up staying because she needed a babysitter.
Really?
Yeah.
These are great stories.
For real, though.
I mean, I just got here because I came to UT. That's not nearly as exciting as you and Eddie's story. Dr.
We're from the
Joseph,
South.
how long have you been here?
I've been here, this is my 5th year, and I came here because of UT as well.
And where did you live before that?
I'm a native New Yorker, born and raised, proud son of Haitian immigrants who came to the United States in 1965, and I was born and raised in Brooklyn, the Lower East Side, and Queens, New York.
I love this because we have such different perspectives. Y'all all been here a certain amount of time, but you see this as kind of a newcomer. 5 years in Austin, and almost 6, I guess, as a
Yes.
newcomer. Yeah. Okay, Eddie, I'm going to start with you. You ready?
I don't know yet.
Well,
He's
I
great.
want to talk about the music scene because I think it has played a part in keeping Austin weird and wonderful. And you were, well, you've been at the center of the music world for a very long time. From your perspective, what do you see as the roots of keeping Austin weird? And do you think that all the changes in the city have threatened that whole concept of us being welcoming and accepting and encouraging creativity?
Well, back in the old days, the quote that I got most play out of was that we had cold beer and cheap pot, and the cheap actually was kind of across the board. Cheap rent was really what got the toehold. Cheap rent and tolerance. Back in the early days of Armadillo World Headquarters, when I suddenly realized that I had a place that couldn't possibly be filled with a rock and roll audience every night because it was just too enormous, we got very fancy with our bookings, and we had ballet one Sunday a month, and there was not anything stuck in my memory quite as wonderful as seeing 150 parents and blue-haired grannies watching the little darlings in their tutus, and behind those people 150 bikers looking at the tutus too. And all of them drinking Shiner. We put Shiner on the map because it was cheap. But the diversity that we found we had to apply to this big old vacant armory is kind of what made the mix. We had blues, we had country music, we had the first punk. Jesse Sublett, the man who edited my memoir, but did too much work for me to just call him an editor. So he's on the cover as the co-author of. He was Austin's first punk star, and he's still the coolest guy in town. I think he is to me what Paul English was to Willie. You know, it takes a lot of time with a really sharp razor to make that beautiful little mustache so cool.
So with the Armadillo World Headquarters and then Threadgill's, you've seen both sides of it because you were there at the beginning of the music scene, but then recently you had to shut down the World Headquarters over on Barton Springs because of the cost. So you've seen the yin and the yang of Austin's success. So talk a little bit about keeping Austin weird in relationship to the rising rents.
Well, the motivation of the people making the adjustments, it always comes back to the people. And Kenneth Threadgill, when Janice first started singing at his little beer joint, was just an ordinary redneck. And since I'm from Mississippi, I know something about that. He was told by Janice that if he would never use the N-word, he would always have a young girl sitting on his knee requesting songs. He never used the N-word again. And so when Joan Baez first came to town and was going out to Threadgill, she didn't go in the door because she heard that it was not integrated. Overnight, Mance Lipscomb and other black musicians were playing and being treated with respect, and it was because Kenneth Threadgill wouldn't let his redneck, pot-bellied, nasty old rednecks say the first thing about anybody of a diverse quality, because Janice was standing behind him. And Janice and I didn't have any chemistry at all. I told everybody I was too good looking for her. She was tough as nails and had been treated poorly, real badly, by the fraternity boys on campus. And so all of that scene started shifting because one person told one other person that it was really cool not to be a jackass. And
that's kind of an important rule for life, isn't it?
It is. Yeah.
All right, I want to talk more about the rising rents and the Threadgill story, but because we're talking about business owners, and it's my understanding this moniker of Keep Austin Weird, and my limited research started kind of at the Chamber of Commerce. It was kind of like this was a way to support local business. We're weird in Austin, support local business. So I want to talk to Lola about being a small business owner and had really one of the hidden gems of Cajun soul food, and also you've done a lot of community service in Austin. So did the Keep Austin Weird business focus, you think it helped your business? Were there challenges that you faced as a business owner?
Yes, ma'am. It was a lot of challenges. Just unlocking the door was a challenge. Simply because, I say that because you never know who's gonna walk through the door or where your money coming from. So the challenge was between me and God and me, to keep the faith, to always trust and believe that he was the only way, because only he could touch the heart of man to let man know, hey, let's go support Lola. Let's go and donate this and that. I mean, anytime you're in the will of God, he's going to get in your way, and he's going to be there for you. And that's what Keeping Weird was about, because I brought in God into my business. And even when you're being weird and feeding the homeless, and that was weird for business owner with absolutely nothing, starting from ground zero. The first day I opened up the doors to cook a big old pot of spaghetti to feed the community. I did that because I came from the poorest state in the United States, not to mention when I walk into one of the richest states in the United States, which is Austin, Texas. I walked into poverty, which was the projects. So I had to give all I had back. And all I ever asked God for when I came into this place and realized that it wasn't Hollywood. This was really a jungle that needed help and needed to be changed. And that's where the weirdness came in with me, because I couldn't understand what was going on. This is not what I studied in school back in Louisiana. It's supposed to be awe and richness, and I didn't see that. And so I had to turn myself into the impossible to be possible for those that was in need, even combing the kids' hair and whatever it took to make those things happen. That's what I did. I just stepped on board and said, whatever you want to do, Lord, use me. And he's been using me ever since.
Dr. Joseph, the realities of Austin today are the realities of a lot of large growing cities, in that the people who made it weird and wonderful are in some ways being forced out because of the high cost of living. So can we keep this idea of this weird, wonderful place and honor that wonderful concept of Dr. King about being a beloved community that empowers all people? Tell us from your perspective as an educator and someone who's lived here about 5 years.
Yeah, no, thank you all for the invitation. My perspective is one of an activist and a historian and a scholar and a writer. My new book, I have a new book coming out in April. Some people have the little placard here, so you're always doing PR for your book, The Sword and the Shield, which is a dual biography of Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And I've spent a lifetime studying civil rights. My mother was a labor organizer, trade unionist. She's 81 now, but I was on my first picket line in New York City, East 92nd Street, Mount Sinai Hospital, when I was in elementary school. So I grew up in a household that was concerned with labor and civil rights and human rights. My mother is a feminist. She is somebody who brought so many different people into our sphere growing up in New York City. So we grew up around folks who were Jewish Americans, folks who were Italian American, folks from West Africa, from Haiti. My mom speaks fluent Spanish, so we grew up around Puerto Rican and Dominican folks who were all social justice activists. So in a way, I would have thought when I was a teenager, because I was leading protests in Jamaica, Queens, and other places, that I was going to be a full-time organizer. And by going to Stony Brook University and then Temple, I really stumbled into becoming an academic. So when I think of myself, I always think of myself as a scholar activist and not somebody who was predestined to be an academic and in the ivory towers. That being said, when you think about somebody like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and this idea of a beloved community and keep Austin weird, one of the things that we don't do in this country is really understand and struggle and honor Dr. King's radical legacy, because that's what Dr. King is. Dr. King is a revolutionary whose concept of a beloved community pointedly criticized white supremacy, pointedly criticized racial segregation, pointedly criticized state-sanctioned violence from the United States. Remember, April 4th, 1967, Riverside Church in New York City, Dr. King breaks with the Johnson administration, and him and LBJ had been cool, but by 67, no longer on speaking terms, because he calls America the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. But he's optimistic. He says it can change through what he calls a bitter but beautiful struggle. What did he mean? I will tell you. The bitter but beautiful struggle for Dr. King was this idea of radical black citizenship. What King called radical black citizenship wasn't just the absence of racial oppression. He said that black citizenship needed to encompass guaranteed income, a living wage, end to environmental racism, decent housing, and the end of disparities in public school education, residential segregation, and police brutality. Those were just the tips of the iceberg for Dr. King. And he claimed that this idea of radical black citizenship, he was looking at universality, but through the particular lens of black folks. So we always come back to black folks, even though we use words like diversity and multiculturalism. The original sin in the United States is racial slavery. What racial slavery did for this country is build up global capitalism, okay? And there's great books to check out on this, people. Empire of Cotton by Sven Becker, right? Ebony and Ivy by Craig Wilder, that looks at the way in which the riches we all enjoy as Americans, and we don't all enjoy it equally, but the riches of this country come from not just chattel slavery, but another century of Jim Crow segregation. Texas and the city of Austin is all implicated in this. Progressives, black, white, Latinx, are all implicated in this. The only thing that Dr. King asked us was to be courageous enough, and he says this at the March on Washington. He says at the March on Washington, August 28, 1963, now is the time to make real the promise of American democracy. And he says we have to struggle together, and we're going to have to go to jail together to transform this country. So King knew it wasn't going to happen in one lifetime, but we've turned him into a paper saint, a plastic saint. We've turned him into a teddy bear, not somebody who is being vilified during the last 3 years of his life, because King was preaching a philosophy of redistributive justice. So for all of us who want to transform Austin, for all of us who think about the beloved community cost. It means we're going to be anti-racist. It means we're going to be anti-sexist. It means we're going to be anti-homophobia. It means we're going to be against transphobia in our lives actively day to day. For white people, it means you're going to lose privilege. For men, it means you're going to lose patriarchal privilege. For people who are cisgender, it means you're going to lose that privilege. There's going to be a cost if we want social justice, if we want human rights. And Dr. King always did what? He challenged us to accept that cost. King said America was great because in America we had the right to protest for right. But we live in a time period where when we think about protest and social justice, we want an easy fix. We don't want to look at ourselves and say, we are enjoying the unearned victories of social justice marchers who wanted more than what we have today. They wanted actual equity. We live in one of the most residentially segregated cities in the United States. We live in a place where we know our school children don't go to school with each other based on zip codes. Even those of us who are in the social justice communities, right? University of Texas at Austin, where I teach, has a horrific history of white supremacy and racial segregation. That continues to this day, even though there's a division of diversity and community of engagement. So we have to walk the talk. It's not enough to have the first black president. And we see the age of Trump and what that means. Even with Obama, we had mass incarceration. We had Ferguson and Michael Brown and Corinne Gaines. So the only way we can get that beloved community right here in Austin and at the same time keep Austin weird is to do what? One, educate ourselves to the history of race and racial justice struggles in the United States, but also their intersectional contours. This is connected with domestic violence, it's connected with environmental racism, it's connected with clean air and water quality, it's connected with elder care and the reason why black women are dying in childbirth disproportionately, even those who make incomes of over $200,000 a year right here today in 2020. It's all connected. And so if we educate ourselves, we can understand why we're living in a city that is destined to be, people are saying in the next decade, in the next 2 decades, produce the most wealth in the United States, but how many black people and brown people are going to have access to that wealth? And for those who don't have access, why aren't they having access? Is it de facto just by accident? Is it de jure by law? Is it structural racism? Or is it just that these are just the most unluckiest people on the planet? We have to understand and educate ourselves and then proactively organize and agitate for social and political and racial and economic justice. The only way we can keep Austin weird and pursue a beloved community is by challenging ourselves to understand what that beloved community means. And we are all gonna lose aspects of privilege that we enjoy in an unethical, immoral way right now.
I think we can all go home now. You pretty much summed it up. Thank you, Dr. Joseph. That was eloquent and inspiring. Can I ask you something really simple? Did you feel welcomed when you moved here? I've heard from some of my black friends who moved here that they felt like Austin was so white and not very welcoming. So you moved here with your wife and 3 kids. Did you feel welcome here?
Well, first of all, I'm happy you have black friends. I am. Because there's a ton of people who don't have black friends, and that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is that we live separately. Our children go to separate schools. I'm convinced that Dr. King's notion of racial integration is one of the lost legacies of the 1960s and 70s. This idea that to create a better America, we were going to have to live together, we were going to have to play together, we were going to have to work together, we were going to actually have to create this community. So once we know each other, once we pray together, Queen Lola was talking about her faith. And I went to and grew up, and I'm still a proud Christian, but a segregated Baptist church in New York City. You know, it was segregated. The neighborhood was segregated. So I've met white Baptists and went to Catholic school for 12 years, but they all lived in different neighborhoods in New York City. So even though I went to a predominantly black elementary school, I then went to a predominantly white high school, and even when you made white friends, we all went in different buses, and we went away from each other. So having black friends, having Latinx friends, having friends who are not just diverse, but really coming from groups of people who've been racially, economically oppressed is very, very important, because it really humanizes people's stories. So that's very, very important. And I was losing the
Well, I just
question.
wanted to know if you felt welcome here when you moved here. I mean,
Yeah.
have you felt a sense of community?
Well, I think for African Americans and people of color who move here with access, they are able to build community better than others. So
Okay.
I live in Hyde Park. Hyde Park is not as diverse as I would like it to be, but there have been black and brown and white colleagues and friends at University of Texas who live in Central Austin, who we've created community. The family has created community with. But I will say that if you're African American, most African Americans, even those who are moving in here, can't afford Central Austin. So what people do is they move to Pflugerville. They're around the city, miles and miles away, maybe 8-10 miles away. Even those who work at UT, right? Because it's just a better cost of living. So yes, I felt welcomed, but I also felt that I was extremely fortunate in the access that I was able to have.
Yeah. Eddie, you started out talking about one of the reasons Austin became Austin was the rent was cheap and we were tolerant. The rent's not cheap anymore. And I would really like for you to share the story of why you had to shut down Armadillo World Headquarters.
The property tax and the rent on the building across the river where we had been for 23 years had increased to the point where the next increase was going to see the property tax and the rent go to $50,000 a month. I was being asked to pay property tax on a high-rise that wasn't there. I was, had a one-floor mom-and-pop shop. At the point when I had Armadillo World Headquarters right next door to that former cafeteria. It was built in 1972, while Armadillo was already starting to struggle with increases in rent. Now, what happened at Armadillo would never have happened if my good Lebanese landlord hadn't had a problem on his hands with this old armory that was right in the middle of town. And I went to him when I discovered it late at night one night by wandering out of a little beer joint next door to it. I had just been hired to manage Shiva's headband, a psychedelic rock and roll band. I always joked that I was hired because the electric violin leader of the band didn't know anybody else that owned a suit. And he hired me, and I never wore the suit again. But I had to find a place, and so I went to a jam at George's Cactus Club right next door. 3 little beer joints were sitting on the Moulton Crockett land that his father had accumulated back in 1917. The reason that my landlord was tolerant of me, I think, was that when I met him in 1972, I never had long hair; it just gets bigger. He came to survey his property next door to M.K. Haig's property and determined to build a cafeteria there. And I met him on the sidewalk out front, and I knew that his father had been a buddy, but I always had this history thing. And I think it was probably because when I was a little kid, I was allowed to ride the bus from Hyde Park to, which was a rent house neighborhood. I was allowed to ride the bus on Saturdays downtown, and then I would go to the shops up and down 6th Street, and I could buy switchblades at Liberal Outlet for $1.95 and go to junior high next to where the swim center is now and turn over my inventory. I've always been real I've always had a terrible problem about marking stuff up. I've never been able to look people in the eye when I charged them. I have never rung up a sale at Thread Guilds, by the way. I don't do that. I got a hippie gene that doesn't suit me well with that part of the transaction. But in junior high, I would go in with things that I got off of East 6th Street, like dice that only had 4s and 3s. All kinds of contraband that I could stand on and Allen Junior High burned down when I was in junior high, and so all of the this is how integration started in Austin, because it was forced on the school system by having the Mexican American junior high burned down and forcing the kids at the university junior high to go in the morning for half a day and then let us out, and those kids would come to school. I would stand on the steps and do my contraband thing, and my mother immediately bought a lot to build a house on further into Hyde Park so that I would be able to switch to another junior high and go to school all day. She wasn't going to have me sitting around half a day not being in school.
Eddie, we've meandered a little bit farther away from the rising rent question.
I'm still moving inventory.
But you really had to fold the tent at world headquarters because your rent.
Because the property tax and the rent was going to go up to $50,000 a month, and I challenge anybody to try to get that out of Meatloaf.
Right. Well, that's what I want. Well, I want to talk to Lola too, because is that what you also had to shut down a restaurant? Is that right?
I did.
And was that also because of rising rent?
Well, it looked like the man gave me a big break for at least, 5 years. I thank God for that. He didn't touch the rent. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, every year it went up and up and up, and which was, it wasn't, because it was reasonable in the beginning. And I just, to be honest with you, I wasn't trying to close down. I didn't want to shut down. But my husband had cancer. Mm-hmm. He recently died.
I'm sorry.
6 weeks ago.
I'm so sorry.
And I had to move my ministry from my business, from the streets, to focus on my husband, because he became my ministry. And now that he's not here, I'm ready to get back out there and do whatever I can to make the community back to what it was, what it should be, because to be honest with you, it's worse than what it was when I was out there. I don't see nobody out there really feeding the people. I see the poverty getting worse. And I think that the best way to keep Austin weird is for us to really, and I wanted to back up and say something. It's hard to talk about Martin Luther King without talking about John F. Kennedy. We got to put them together, because that's the way I came on the scene. I can't have black without white. I don't have a problem with prejudice. I need the white people in my life. And not only do I need white people in my life, I need the rich white people in my life. I do. I got to have them. And they ain't never done me nothing but took me higher and higher, And that's why I love them, because you don't kick it with white folks, black folks, and don't think they ain't gonna take you with them. So that's me. I got to have them, because what I'm carrying in life is for God and God alone. And he said that he'll take from the rich and give to the poor. And I need to be in the center of their life so that I can help them understand that education is one thing, power is another thing, money is something else, what you accomplish is another thing, but you still got to look down and see exactly who really is holding you up. Because if it wasn't for the poor people, and they poor in when I hit the streets, I see them in Indian po, black po, white po, Chinese po. I mean, and I didn't even know all them people can get po. For real though, until I start feeding the streets. And they every nationality. So we just can't say, oh, black folks this, black folks need to go get a job. Black folks, it's time for us to start. If we want to talk about Martin Luther King for real though, he was a prophet. And he was more like trying to let black folks know that this is not only a white man's world, but it's a black woman and a white woman's world. It's not a man's thing, it's a everybody's thing. And it's time, and Martin Luther King was trying to get us to understand education was a very powerful tool, but without God, education ain't nothing. And that's where I come in the scene at, because I don't feel that I need all of that as long as I got all my white friends. For real, because they got all that. And they don't mind bringing it into your ministry, into your business, to make you grow to where you want to know. Because see, they're not getting ready to go in them streets and deal with all them homeless people, but they don't mind sending you. And I don't mind going. Because when they send you right, they send you shiny, they send you with stars and stripes. And that's why I don't mind having them in my life. I got to have them. Because they're going to follow what they hungry and thirsty for God, just like I am. I had to kind of leave black folks alone, to be honest with you, because they're not ready for where I'm going to. I'm going into places where so many of them is already at, and they don't know how to come out. And the best way to come out is to send somebody that's already been there. If I already been homeless, don't you know I know how to go back and help them people? Don't you know that if I already been thirsty for the gospel of Jesus Christ, that means I had to get thirsty enough to seek ye first the kingdom of heaven and find all of his righteousness, that I can go out and bring somebody back, because you can't just go out there and feed the people without praying for the people and giving the people a word of God, not of UT or Texas A&M. That's a whole new ball game when you get to hitting the streets and helping the poor. We have to learn how to help the poor. It's too many people want to put educated ideals in how to help the poor. The poor are going to be amongst us always. That's what Jesus said. That ain't me. So since we know this, why don't we prepare ourselves to take care of them? Yes, I may be a president of the United States, but it don't stop him from helping the poor in a generous way. Too much of our money is going into the wrong hands. We need to start chasing our money. That's what I used to tell people. Don't just donate your money to my ministry without getting on my bus and let me show you where your money going. I want you to know. I want you to see. As a matter of fact, I don't even want your money. Just give me what I asked for. And that's why I like them white folks.
So I want to talk about Central Texas as a region and keeping it weird and keeping it welcoming. And we've been all over the map, and this has been such a unique, wonderful conversation, which I think is appropriate to our topic today. We've come at this from many different angles. But as we exceed 1 million people in Austin and more than, 2 million in the region, what do you think each of us needs to focus on when it comes to this character of community? And Dr. Joseph, you've touched on it a little bit, but what are some things that we need to keep in mind as individuals to ensure that Austin doesn't lose the very things that put it on the map? Or have we already lost those things?
Well, I think, Austin is representative of major American cities. And this idea of gentrification, and there's a whole debate and dialogue on gentrification happening nationally and in this city too. And in the 1960s, and the 50s, they called gentrification urban renewal, right? And critics like James Baldwin called it Negro removal, right? And when you think about New York City, where I'm from, Major Deegan Expressway, Robert Moses, the power builder, the power broker, Miami, Oakland, Los Angeles, there were major highways, Atlanta, constructed in the post-war era that really displaced St. Louis, the Arches, that really displaced, at times, thriving African-American communities, and times thriving Puerto Rican and Dominican and Mexican-American communities all over. That effort at urban renewal failed, and what you saw in the 1970s and 80s is suburbanization, and sometimes people talk about Sun Belt America. Texas were a product of that, and you had cities like Austin, which were there, which were sort of sleepy cities, become sort of boom towns by the 90s and the 2000s. We're in another era of gentrification, and this era of gentrification is actually working in terms of transforming cities like New York City, like downtown Brooklyn, but it's only working along lines and axes of racial segregation, of intersectional injustice. And by intersectional injustice, I mean this idea that sometimes people call this identity politics, but we have to remember the first identity politics from the founding fathers is white, male, patriarchal, cisgender supremacy. That's the first identity politics. So when black people or black women or black feminists or Latinx feminists start saying, hey, this is who I am and we're against these kinds of oppression, the notion that that's called identity politics is one of the bitter ironies of our time, because what they're talking about and what suffragism and feminism is talking about is universal citizenship, right? It's through the lens of either women or people of color, right? So when we think about gentrification now, both in Central Texas and the larger United States, it's occurring along an ideology of white supremacy, whether that's Democrats or Republicans. That's what's so interesting. The way in which inequality is structured, right now it's structured in a bipartisan way. The only way we can get out of this is to start thinking to ourselves, we want to see, how is racism defined? Racism is defined by impact, by results. If we lived in a true anti-racist society, what would we see? Not only would we see racial integration, but we would see wealth redistribution and income redistribution, right? African Americans are 12% of the population. Well, they would be represented in positive social economic indicators around that percentage. They wouldn't be overrepresented in jail or poverty. They wouldn't be underrepresented in corporate America or as presidents of universities or different private or public institutions. That's how an anti-racist society looks like. An anti-sexist society is very similar. Women make up more than 50% of the population. When we think about governors and senators, let alone president of the United States or state legislatures, they would be represented along their population, their demographic access, including in corporate America. So these are all things that can happen, but we have to struggle and confront these injustices, even among progressives, because sometimes we think to ourselves, well, we are speaking to the choir, but we're not. There's many different blind spots among progressives. There's many men who will talk about social justice, but they won't talk about domestic violence against women. They won't talk about how are we going to raise our girls to be leaders, and they won't talk about how are we going to raise our boys to stop raping girls and stop being physically violent against women and little girls, right? So we are all implicated in this, even those of us who think we're trying to lead ethical lives, that we're trying to lead moral lives. So what we face right now, and the three things, I'll leave it with this. I always say organize, educate, agitate. Organizing is not necessarily you become Cesar Chavez or you become Ella Baker or you become Dolores Huerta and we hear about you in the history books. I'm saying in your own locale, whether it's in your church, it's at Threadgill's, whether it's a restaurant. We all have a ministry to do, even if we're just interested in a secular ministry and it's not a religious ministry. So I'm saying organize where you're at, But what do you organize for? You're organizing for social justice. One of the best things Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. ever said in 1963, letter from Birmingham jail, he said that the young people who were being arrested in Birmingham in the spring of 1963 would one day be remembered as heroes. And what King said was that they're going to be remembered as heroes in the future for bringing us all back to those great wells of democracy that were dug deep by the founding fathers. King believed in America more than the founding fathers did and more than contemporary Americans did. Okay? And the reason he believed in America was that he believed this idea of the beloved community could transform the country. He thought that this country had so much potential if it was a proponent of peace and not war, if it was a proponent of human rights and not racial segregation, if it didn't believe that opponents were enemies and not just people you disagreed with, right? So when we think about King and this beloved community, he was on to something profound and powerful, and one of the bitter ironies of our time is not just his assassination, April 4th, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee, but also the way in which we've distorted those ideas. King is one of the new founding fathers, just like Ella Baker, who organized the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, is one of the new founding mothers of a new democracy that's expansive enough to include all of us. It's talking about universality, but through the particular struggle of black and brown and poor peoples. Why? Because if we transform their lives, it's going to reverberate to all of us. Right? So when people talk about Black Lives Matter and then other people push back and say all lives matter, we know all lives matter. The reason we're saying and screaming and crying Black Lives Matter is because we know we live in a society where Black lives do not matter. We've got the data, we've got the statistics, we've got the pain, we've gone to the funerals, right? And so if we don't have the strength to speak truth to power, we are doomed. And we are dooming our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren because we don't have the courage to talk about the inequality that is making us implode as a society, not just politically and culturally, but also ethically and morally. And that's what King was talking about too when he talked about that beloved community. So all of us here in Central Texas, the onus is on all of us to organize, to educate ourselves, but also to agitate and to speak our truths even while we're listening to other people's truths. But we've got to be able to speak our truths, and our truths are that when we think about this idea of citizenship right here in the United States, that citizenship is purchased, and disproportionately black and brown and poor people do not have access to that citizenship. And what do we mean by that citizenship? It's living in Tarrytown, it's living in Westlake, it's living in Hyde Park, it's going swimming and yoga and organic fruits and vegetables, and you don't live in food deserts. It's vacationing, whether it's in Aspen or in California or in Europe. That's citizenship, and we all should have access to that, irrespective of our backgrounds, irrespective of our sexuality, our body identification, and where we're from. And if we don't have that equal access, then that means we've got one class of citizens in the United States and another class of non-citizens, and no democracy can survive with different classes of citizenship.
Well, that's quite a call to action.
There you go.
Confronting injustices where we are, each of us in our lives. Eddie, I'm going to let you have the final word today. What do you think we as Austinites can do individually to preserve that funky, wonderful flavor that you witnessed back in the 70s? Are there things that we can do to encourage more tolerance in our lives like you all did at the Armadillo World Headquarters back in 1971?
Well, you asked me the question and then you provide the words for the answer.
Sorry. Now talk into that microphone. We want to hear you.
Well, the key word in what you threw at me there is tolerance. And it's not there's something, real tolerance has to come from a spiritual place, not just an intellectual place. How we educate our population to really feel what it is we're preaching. It's, you can you can be as succinct as you want to be about the the pain of the people who don't have what equality should mean for them. It's getting almost impossible for the cop on the street to afford to live in the community that he's trying to police, and that's the one. The same is true of waitresses and cooks and all the people that work for me. I always start that reminiscing with the police, though, because those are the people to whom a real heartfelt humanity and tolerance has got to be exemplified if we're going to have the kind of society that we all pray for, and from the my situation is not so much Austin is so segregated that we've never really had much of a black presence. I've done everything I can to promote Threadgill's, and we have a larger and larger black audience at Threadgill's because our food is very Southern, and food is the one real product that I believe can bring us together more than almost anything else.
And music. Food and music.
Well,
yeah.
there's and I'd just give anything in the world to be able to run a restaurant without a drummer.
Well,
the hardest thing in the world is to make a drummer shut up and enjoy supper. And some of my best friends are drummers, but oh Lord, I hate their drums.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. But on that beat, we're going to have to wrap it up. But before we say goodbye, I do want Ascension Seton and Derek Cummett to come up and say a few words. Derek.
Well, thank you all for being here and sharing your enlightenment and helping us be enlightened as we continue. My name is Derek Covert, and I just joined Ascension Seton in November, so this was a particular topic of interest to me, not only to Ascension Seton because of the work that we do, but me because I'm coming from Louisiana and experiencing this newness as well of Central Texas, but also of Austin. And we're happy to continue partnering with Leadership Austin Engage as we see that our values align so well of inclusiveness and community, and then our being able to offer truly the spiritually centered and holistic care for individuals and communities, that we can continue to increase that within this community and be a part of our ongoing building a beloved community. So thank you for having us, and we are excited to continue to sponsor Leadership Austin Engage.
Thank you, Derek Covert with Ascension Seton. For the Leadership Austin alums in the room, don't forget this table over here will be the alumni corner where you can continue this conversation. Our next Engage breakfast is Wednesday, February 12th. Our topic is power, equity, and philanthropy. But most of all, I want to thank our panelists today for giving us such a unique, wonderful perspective on our unique, wonderful city. Dr. Joseph, Lola, Eddie Wilson, thank you. Thank you all for sharing your morning with us. Go out and make it a great day and keep this city weird and welcoming and wonderful.